Data is king. Is data still king if you don't do anything with it?
Some of our strongest memories are tied to travel experiences. How do we continue to do that and make that sustainable? And how do we make it not a buzzword?
Why can't we leverage technology to make sustainability and carbon offsets traceable and reportable and trustworthy? With sustainability, you shouldn't be thinking about it. It shouldn't be thrown around as a buzzword. It should just be done.
When you think about hospitality as a whole, how do they leverage that data to unlock the value of CO2 emissions and sustainability, carbon offset?
Initially, it's using the data to create awareness, right? And first of all, the awareness is to come in at a corporate level or at the hotel level. Can't bother the customer. At what cost am I reducing my CO2 footprint? Is this costing me my business in some cases?
Small changes can make big impact. There's little things we can all do, and it's not as heavy as people think it is.
You've got to think of it as an engineering problem in a way. You've got to cut the problem up in small pieces, and then it's actually doable. This also with sustainability. It's made very heavy because it's small changes by many people, not just by a few. Yeah, so my co-founder, she's known Case for I think about 5 years or something, and she was a lawyer for about 20 years, and I think she helped Case with a couple of things, and they kept up to date and they stayed in touch. I didn't know Case personally, however, I come from the same area of Terneuzen in Holland, and Case is sort of a bit of a local hero in my eyes.
Yeah.
So Verena, my co-founder, knew Case, and I think about 2 years ago, our company is about 2.5 years old, right? So I think about 2 years ago we started talking to Case. We went to Terneuzen and just discussed the possibilities and the opportunities that are possible, right? But from there we still had to do a load of building, testing, getting out in the marketplace and actually seeing what is important and what isn't important, right? Because when you start something, it's very different from reality, from what you got in your head. So, So basically, I think the gist of it is, and that's where I'm going to also get into probably in the podcast later, is data is king, right? You guys are in the business of data, but I always ask, is data still king if you don't do anything with it, right? If it's not actionable or you don't take action on data, it's like, oh yeah, it's good to know, but what now, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we are looking for companies like OmniBoost who have basically massive piles of data and connection points, okay, to really leverage that end of it in the terms of how much CO2 does a hotel stay emit, in what hotel, and you can go really specific with it, okay, regarding the data, but you can also go really specific with it regarding climate financing or carbon offsetting, and that is where we come in. So basically, we are a platform that allows data aggregators to compensate emissions of their customers, okay, but completely reportable, traceable, and that is our USP. So that's our technology end of it. But we also have a sort of a consulting part of it because it's still very nascent, really, to compensate CO2. What does that mean? Some people think, oh, there's been some bad news about it as well. There's also a lot of good things happening. But we really think that the Kickstarter for the market that we're in and to unlock the value is in data.
Yeah.
So that's where it really ties in. And that's, I know why Case is very, what's the word? Enthusiastic about partnership.
Yeah. So. Case by nature is enthusiastic, and when he gets super excited about something, it gets wild. So, I mean, honestly, I think that's a great kickoff to the show, right? The piece about data is king, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Joe, appreciate you coming on. Joe Sykes is the co-founder and director of a company called ecommit, which is helping really educate the market on sustainability, CO2 emissions. And as you're kind of talking, there's the data side of things and there's the consulting side of things. And I think really it's more the education because as we know in this world, sustainability, CO2 emissions, all that is buzzwords. We're talking about, high level conversation about climate change. There's tons of opinions on it. There's tons of conversations across the scale, across the world on making our planet better, making it more sustainable, creating. It's hard to say without using the word sustainable, which is such a buzzword today, right?
I know you can't get everything.
Creating more sustainability, but also in a way, especially as it relates to hospitality. And people love to travel. They want to experience the world. Our world is meant to be explored, right? Some of our strongest memories are tied to travel experiences, to experiences, being somewhere, doing something, a feeling, a smell, a sound. And so how do we continue to do that and make that sustainable? And that's why I was really excited for this podcast. And you mentioned data is king. I did a whole conversation on data as OmniBoost data unification platform. Data can tell many stories. Data can tell you the wrong stories if you don't utilize the data and understand why you have data, what that data is saying, how it's utilized, and how it's properly taken on. So all that to say, really excited about this conversation, and we kicked off with a bang. So I think the first great question that as you are kind of really leading this charge on the education side, let's talk a little bit about ecommit. Why was it founded? And, especially from a hospitality standpoint, how are you looking at hospitality? And that includes travel, right? Hotels, all those things. How is that a player in the space?
Yeah, so I'd have to go back a little while because I actually come from a family of third generation restaurant owners. And I think in 2015, I was 19 and I went into our family business, a restaurant. I stayed in there for about 3 years and saw a load of opportunities regarding labor, a load of labor shortages in restaurants and hotels. So I set up a robotic kitchen venture in 2019. I think about 6 months later or something, we were talking to the biggest hotel chains in the Netherlands. And I think a month later, COVID hit, and it's you know the story.
A little bit of bad timing, right? Good idea, wrong
time. A little
time.
bit of bad timing, exactly. So then I said, okay, right. So take a few steps back, went back to the family business, which was like we had no customers, basically, right? I mean, you got to imagine. I remember standing in the restaurant and somebody calling us saying you have to close the restaurant within 20 minutes. Right, and there's like 100 people sat there dining. That's not very hospitable, right? So you've got to ask them to leave, and I think within 12 hours, I've set up a delivery system, and we were rocking and rolling doing deliveries. And whilst we were doing the deliveries, I think I brought the first delivery as well, which was a good experience because it eventually led to the following. We had I think about 10 guys driving up and down all around the region, with not electric cars, right? Because because you see a lot of EVs, but in the Netherlands, which is one of the leading countries in usage of EVs, it's something like 4% EV, right, and 96% ICE, which is just the reality of the situation. Although we're seeing a lot of EVs being pushed, so I was thinking whilst delivering and driving, I was thinking, all right. How can we give a sort of sustainable delivery, and sustainable experience to a customer without breaking the bank on electric vehicles, right? And that basically led me down the rabbit hole of sustainability and specifically carbon offsetting, okay? So I think many months later, I ran into a data issue with my robotics, and I had this aha moment where I thought, wait, why can't we leverage technology to make sustainability and carbon offsets traceable and reportable and trustworthy and all that sort of stuff? That was where I began, and I think in the by the end of 2021, I had my first little team together, and then I met my real co-founder, Verena, who's been in a lawyer for 20 years, like I mentioned, and it just was an immediate click from the start, right? So and then we went off. So my point, and that it doesn't only apply to hospitality, but if you think about sort of unspoken expectations, I think you just mentioned that earlier on. An unspoken expectation is my room has to be spotless. I don't want to be saying it or thinking it, right? It's an unspoken expectation. So, I mean, another unspoken expectation is safety, right? In a hotel, for example, right? You
Yeah.
expect it to be safe. You don't even have. You shouldn't be thinking about it. Well, we think the same thing with sustainability. You shouldn't be thinking about it. It should be thrown around as a buzzword. It should just
Yeah.
be covered. It should just be done, right? So it's the unspoken expectations that we want to fulfill, but we want to do it according to all the new upcoming legislations, laws, expectations, because it is really being driven from government
Yeah.
top down, right? So it all has to be compliance and that sort of stuff. So it all ties into hospitality, because hospitality touches everything, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, pretty much everybody in the Western world has been to a hotel,
Yeah.
right? So it touches everything, and that's where I think the data can be leveraged to its maximum in the hospitality industry for carbon offsets, climate financing, however you want to call it. So yeah, that.
It's interesting too, and also, we were talking a little bit before, the region you come from in the Netherlands, same region where, Case and the headquarters of OmniBoost resides down in Zeeland, which is always fun because, I work a lot with the Dutch consulate here, and I know a lot of Dutch people in New York. When I talk about, oh yeah, I work for a Dutch company, like, oh yeah, Amsterdam, like, no, Utrecht, Rotterdam, The Hague, no, down in Zeeland, they're like, huh? It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
Tunisia. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I know. Kind of weird. So it's always kind of fun and really cool that, there's those tie-ins that, we look at this idea of using these buzzwords of sustainability and the unspoken expectations, right? The room being clean. That's kind of mentioned. There's certain, if I'm in a resort on a beach and I come in sandy, taking a shower, whatever, like I do want my room clean, but like if I'm traveling for work, those are, I could hang the sign up, like, you don't need to turn my room over if I'm only going to be there for 2 nights. It's a work trip. Like, there's kind of those differences where, we know as humans we can make a difference, right? Practical things too, right? Like water usage and being smart. Like, there's little things we can all do, right? But I think that, and all those small things do add up to make big impact.
yeah,
But those are little things that are helpful, but we got to think about the bigger issue, the bigger problem, and what is the data telling us, and where can we leverage that across different places? And you kind of made a good point. Hospitality travel is so important and impactful to many people, and I think there was a stat just recently. The Sunday after the 4th of July was one of the biggest days for American airports. More people traveling than I think, like, over the last decade on a single day crossing airports. And to think that, it shows, even while prices are rising for travel, hotel prices are rising, all this, people are still wanting to get out and explore and do and be. And we think about generationally, we think about younger generations, there is much more of a look and feel, or a call to um, being more sustainable, offsetting our footprint, and wanting to stay with brands,
yeah,
spend their money with companies and brands that are working to do that. So when we think about it from a hospitality standpoint, you kind of brought up some of the unspoken expectations, but we talked about data, and data is king. So how do hospitality brands, how do, even airlines, when you think about hospitality as a whole, how do they leverage that data, and what is it that they can do with data to unlock the value of, CO2 emissions and sustainability, carbon offsetting?
yeah. So it's a good question. See, what you see a lot happening right now is first of all the collection of the data, right, and it being put on dashboarding, so to create awareness, right? That's step number one. If we don't know, we're not aware, and then you can go many ways with it. And what you see right now, there's a lot of push on reducing CO2 emissions at all costs, right? And that is where, well, stop, cut. I actually forgot your question.
Yeah, no problem. The question kind of goes into, we're talking about the data emissions, we're talking about hospitality brands and industries, and we have this data. How do we actually use that data to unlock the value of it? So I
Yeah.
think, I love this train of thought of education and awareness. I think the first part is awareness, and there is a lot of awareness in terms of we're thinking about sustainability, but maybe not awareness that there's options or there's data out there. So yeah, so how do we use this data to unlock the value of that?
Yeah. So initially, it's using the data to create awareness, right? And first of all, the awareness has to come in at a corporate level or at the hotel level, right? Because it can't bother the customer, right?
Yeah.
So that is an important thing to note. We don't want to overload the client or the guest with too many sustainable, talk, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, okay, now how do we create impact using the data? So it's interesting because I've got some numbers here, and if you look at the average emissions of a hotel stay, this is just across the US, you're looking at 16.1 kilograms per night. That's about 35 pounds. So in 2022, right, the US hospitality industry sold approximately 1.2 billion nights, right? So that equals 19,320,000,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions. Okay, what does that even mean, right? And I always like to translate it in the form of how many acres of trees would you need to basically compensate for those emissions, right? Trees are the lungs of the earth; they take in the CO2. So you basically would need the surface area of the state of New Jersey to compensate those emissions of the complete hospitality industry in the US, right? So that's a lot, but it's also not that much. It's about half the size of the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is also not a very big country, to say the least. So first of all, it's creating this translation of CO2 expert jargon to things people understand. Okay, you know what the state of New Jersey is, you know what a tree is, right? That is the type of impact we can have. But then the question is, at what cost, right? Because I go to many companies from small to very large, and people want to reduce their CO2 footprint, and that's great, right? But it comes at a point where, at what cost am I reducing my CO2 footprint, right?
Yeah.
How much is this costing me? Is this costing me my business in some cases, right? That can't be the goal, right? The goal is to work with sustainability, meaning what is the essence of sustainability? That you're sustainable and that you're going to, like, your business also survives, right? It can't be one-way street. So if you look at, what would be necessary on a per night basis regarding climate financing to compensate for those emissions, you're talking about a 0.7% increase in ADR across hotels, right? So to accomplish this goal. So we're looking at like $1 per night on an average ADR of $148 or something in the US. So it's really a fraction, because if you look at the inflation levels we've been having in the last 3 years, right, that has zero impact on the environment or whatever, whilst the 0.7% increase actually can create a massive impact. It's a 0.7% increase to basically save the state of New Jersey. I mean, you can't really look at it that way, but
yeah,
just to visualize it for you.
Yeah, I mean, visualizing it, the impact is that kind of what you're saying is that small changes can make big impact. And
Yes.
I think the awareness is that, and I do think this is kind of a scary thing. Like, okay, CO2 emissions, sustainability, we're looking at this as this is a heavy thing, and it's going to cause, I need to hire a team around this, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to implement all these strategies. When in reality, there's things that need to be implemented, but the impact, the net impact of doing a few small things is huge, and it's not as heavy as people think it is, even though it feels like, oh, we need to be carbon neutral, we need to offset, we need to do all these things. It feels heavy because the
Yes.
weight of the conversation at a global scale makes it feel heavy for brands to think about, versus the way you just kind of broke it down makes it really almost make sense. Like, oh, okay, if we did X on each day, $1, it changes a lot of things, right? The
Yep.
impact of that could be, you know, quite high at a very low cost versus like most people think, oh, it's going to cost like, 1,000 per just to make that kind of impact. When really
Exactly.
it's not, and that's really interesting because even for me in my brain, it seems before we got into this call, like, it just seems like it's a heavy, heavy subject. It's a it's a lot that you have to do versus like the practical things.
No, absolutely. But and that is why you've got to think of it as an engineering problem in a way, right? You've got to cut the problem up in small pieces, and then it's actually doable, right? Then you can actually work with it. Of course, if we want to, build a Hudson bridge, then then it's going to be a hard thing to put put that bridge in there in one go. No, it's going to be made in pieces. It's different engineering companies working on it. It's a joint effort, all small pieces coming together, right, creating something. So this also with sustainability, it's made very heavy, in the media, for example, and by government, it's made very heavy subject. But basically, what we've been talking about throughout this podcast is it's only small changes that can have actually the biggest impact, right? Because it's small changes by many people, not just
Yeah.
by a few, right?
Yeah. And when you think about this kind of awareness piece, and obviously we'll get into, companies leveraging kind of what you all are doing, but there's also the side of, the listeners out there, those that are staying at hotels and traveling, there's little things that we can do, right? We talked about not having the room turned over every night, being just more thoughtful on little things like keeping water running all the time and things of that nature. Like, it's really interesting to think that there are small habits, habitual changes that individuals can do in their daily lives as they're traveling, when they're out and about, that work well with what hospitality or hotel brands are already trying to put in place and the options that you have just to be more sustainable. And those little changes, those little habitual changes for us can make a big impact as well, in combination with what the brands are trying to do from a global or a local scale, depending on if it's a regional brand or a big global corporate, right?
Yep, yep, definitely. And I also think regarding like corporate guests for hotels and in the hospitality industry, they are basically they need some type of way to get a reporting on things like this, right? So they need data because this, like, my world is legislation almost, right? It's a constant new stream of expectations from government to actually show what is your CO2 footprint, right? And it goes all the way down. Like here in the Netherlands, we now have reporting standards on a per car basis for a company, right? So it goes that far, and this is not going to stop, right? It's only going to get more. So if we can create awareness at the hotel level, but we can then also create awareness at a customer level, right, at a guest level, then you have the full picture. But that's a step-by-step process. That is not realized in 2 years or maybe in 5 years, right? Really, the first step now is making the data actionable, right? Now we have the data. So that's basically what we will be doing together, Rob.
Yeah. So we talk about first step being awareness, right? And so making people aware is a big conversation piece. But then we're starting to look at this data. What is kind of the next step? So when you think about from awareness into actually educating and leveraging data, how can hospitality leverage that data, and what are the tools? Right? Obviously, ecommit has a tool for that. Like, talk me through that a little bit. Like, now that we have awareness, what's the next practical step that I think that where we kind of are today? We're in that kind of spot of being maybe becoming more aware and taking a look at what our next steps. But I think maybe the data is not fully there. So like, what's that next step from awareness, and where is the impact that you really look to make with ecommit as we look at the second half of 2024 going into 25 from an impact level?
Yeah. So the first thing after awareness, after actually having the data, is to identify, hey, what are unavoidable emissions? What can't I avoid? So that basically means, how much can I reduce my electricity footprint or whatever, right? It gets to a point where it becomes very difficult to reduce more. So you've got to first know, okay, what part will I never be able to solve, right? through reduction. Because if you have that, that is actually, now you've got the piece that makes it that you can work with immediately, right? Through platforms like us, through carbon credits, and through data, basically. So first is awareness, then it's identifying what is unavoidable, and then you've got to make it, turn it into language and visuals that guests understand. But you also got to understand which guests you are showing this, right? This is not for everybody. Like, that's why I specifically said corporate guests. They would be the very next step into visualizing the footprint or the offset, CO2 offset for a given night, they want reporting on it, etc. Right? That's where the next value unlock is, and it's not per definition the normal consumer. I don't know how you phrase that.
Yeah. No, I think the interesting thing here too, right, is there's some really cool things that can be done from a standpoint of like corporate travel, retreats, an event. Like, hey, here's the event they're doing, and then by making these decisions, here's how you're impacting or how you're creating positive impact by having this type of event at this location with this resort with these things in mind. And so then you can actually kind of show that you can still have great experiences. You can still be hospitable. You can still have the party, have the travel, have the corporate retreat, but also within that, showing what you're doing to offset by being there, doing those things. So you're actually kind of showing both impacts to the business and to the planet. And I think that's a really interesting piece, being able to show that and share that and create that, that tie together, that we're all working together to still have great experiences, but make positive impact in what we're doing and how we're doing it. I think that is really kind of cool. It's something that we don't realize is out there and could be done, or maybe we do, and it's just not highlighted the right way, where it just becomes, and it is partly because from a media level, it's a very big, heavy conversation, but there's some really cool things that I think could be shown, shared, done, that create big impact in great ways, that are, at that basic level.
Exactly. Small things can result in very big things, and that is the cool thing about it. And that's why this is actually only possible through the usage of data, right? You can actually only guarantee a certain experience, quality, and stand behind it with sustainability if you have data, right? And you know how to translate that into action. So data is king.
Yeah. So how do we get the data? I think that's a good time to talk about, obviously, OmniBoost, data unification platform. We collect, we have tons of data. There's tons of different data aggregators out there. There's different platforms, especially in hospitality. You have PMS, you have POS, you've got staff planning, you've got inventory management, you have all these different tools that provide data. So let's talk about, like, data is king. Where does the data come from? How does data get leveraged? And how should hospitality specifically be thinking about data, so that we can actually utilize that to tell the story?
Yeah. So the data streams that come in through, for example, the hospitality industry, through the connections of OmniBoost, right? It provides a whole range of different activities, basically, right? And any given activity has a certain emission. Not every activity has an emission, but you'd be surprised. Almost every activity does actually have a certain emission factor. And what's cool on with what you can do with it is there is something called the GHG protocol, and on that protocol, there is emission factor databases being built that are open source, that you can actually translate into getting the right emission factor for that specific country, for that specific activity, for that specific year. So now you can make it very reliable. You can make the data very reliable. So that you can basically these days engineer this quite quite easy to get the right data, right? So it's just a calculation. So once you have the calculation, the question is, what are we going to do with it, right? And there is a whole range of options. But the first thing is, and I'm just basically repeating myself, but that is to really identify the unavoidable emissions, because we also don't want to stop the hospitality industry, of any company for that matter, to reduce their CO2 footprint, right? It can't be, I just offset my CO2 and I don't reduce my CO2 footprint anymore. There's got to be a balance.
Absolutely. I think that makes sense, right? Understanding what is unavoidable versus avoidable, because there are things like, in order to have a hospitable experience, in order to live on this planet, in order to do things, there are actions that have to be taken in order for us to live, i.e., breathing, right? To live on this planet. So I think highlighting that and knowing what's unavoidable versus what is avoidable, and then here's options to actually counteract what's unavoidable. And I do think that is something very unique and interesting that we don't talk enough about, is that, hey, look, there's unavoidable emissions. We know that. These are those things. Let's identify those and then create a strategy, a plan, and opportunities for positive impact in other areas, right? This is unavoidable, but we can do this to that. And creating that visualization, when we started off talking about, this big number, and it's like scary, but it's like, oh, it's like a forest the size of New Jersey. Okay, that's understandable, right? Less deforestation, more planting trees. Like, there's things that like your brain can pick that up really easily from somebody who's not in this every day like you are. I'm sure for you, it's like your brain works at 1,000 miles a minute, but you have to be able to bring that back to somebody out there listening. Like, okay, this is not my world, but we want to make sure that our brand is doing something about it, and bring that level down. It's like, oh, okay. As a person, this is what I can do. As a company, this is what I can do. As a group of people, this is what we can do. And that becomes really exciting and more bite-sizable, right? Like, it's actually, we can take this on and do something about it and feel that what we're doing actually has an impact positively.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that is also one of the things where you see a lot. What you see a lot in my industry is it's a lot of business jargon, a lot of sort of professor type talk, and but at the end of the day, the rest of the world, it's got to be on one line, right? You've got to be able to translate it into some type of comprehensible thing, because otherwise, you'll never get anything done, basically, right?
Yeah.
You'll just be talking amongst the professors and say how cool everything is. But I think the important thing is to be able to make that translation and also understand the roadmap of that translation, right? Who is the target audience of that, for that matter, of tomorrow, and not trying to get it all in one go, basically, because that's also what you see a lot is, okay, also small companies who feel forced to do things and they've got no, don't have any money or, time, whatever, like it's made too big. And that's basically what you've said at the beginning as well, is, we've got to be able to cut it up in small digestible pieces, make sense of it. And it's got to be scientific, but we should really ditch the scientific talk about it, right? Because it just doesn't really help the acceleration of the sustainable activities in that matter.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting you bring this up, because with a lot of these bigger topics, we think even, AI, ML, we think of sustainability, we think of all these kind of hot button topics that we're being talked about in all these different spaces and places. It's the chicken or the egg conversation of theory versus execution. We spend a lot of time talking theories and what ifs. If this happens, then this, versus, okay, we know that this is the problem and this is heavy for everybody. But when we look across the world and we look at different countries, different peoples, different things, that message can't hit everybody. It's not like, humans are so unique and different that you can't give one message and say, all right, this is it. You have to be able to tailor that message to different groups, to different people, to different industries, different impacts, because everyone's going to look at it differently. And when we actually can bring that down to earth and make that executionable, and I think this is where many businesses, and even coming from an OmniBoost standpoint, there's things that we talk about with different business strategies where it's a lot of theory and it's hard to execute. Where it's like, you know what, let's just go. Like, I'm a big fan of like building out and just going and getting something 80% done, testing it, right? Perfect gets in the way of good. Build something good, test it, iterate, make it better, make it great, take great, iterate, test it, and make it better. But you'll never get perfect. If you try to wait for perfect in any business, you will fail. Because perfection is, in my opinion, there's very few things that is perfection. And even imperfection is a flaw, right? You think of diamonds, we all think of diamonds as perfection. And some of the coolest diamonds, the reason why they're the coolest diamonds, they have one small flaw. So it's perfect because of the flaw.
Yep.
And when we stop thinking about trying to make everything perfect, we make things good and we let good turn into great, that's where we can make bigger impacts. And it sounds like from this conversation, that's what you're trying to do with ecommit. And what's exciting is a little teaser, some of the stuff that OmniBoost and ecommit is working on together from a standpoint of how do we make actionable insights from data, how to use that to educate people the right way and create small, sustainable things that make positive impact. And if we just really work through that and we put good out, good turns into great. And that's what I think so many companies fail to do because they want to be perfect. And perfection is a bit of a myth, in my opinion.
No, I
Right. And
totally
it can be
agree.
controversial, but it's just bringing that back in kind of full life cycle for me.
Well, perfection creates inaction, doesn't it? So
I love that. Perfection creates an action. Absolutely. Joe, I
yeah,
know we could talk forever, but I know it's getting late, and I appreciate you for taking so much time. I'm excited about some of the stuff that we are kind of working on. I think what ecommit is doing, and what you, in kind of your story of going through it from small town in the Netherlands into a family restaurant into a robotics that not failed, let's say, that great idea, bad timing, and turning that into a bigger thing, but really thinking. And I think it's really interesting. The cool thing is you could be very theoretical and be like, oh, I'm in this space trying to change the world. But what you're all really doing is focusing on how do you bring that back down. And that was what the idea of this podcast, Talking Hospitality, how do you bring it to a single industry? And we showed how a single industry can make a huge impact through small changes.
yep,
And one of the biggest industries in the world is hospitality. And if the hospitality industry can do small changes to make big impact, think about what we could do if we message that and we bring that to every type of community, every type of company, every type of industry, and we change the messaging to make it fit for them and show them how it's done, what that impact could look like in a decade from now, in 2 decades
yep.
from now, right? That's really exciting stuff.
No, totally agree. So I'm also very excited on the upcoming partnership with ecommit and OmniBoost. I've been looking forward to this for a few years, basically, right? We've built a company up to 20 people now, and we're going to do some amazing things. So, it's data-driven, automated climate impact. So it's going to be reportable. It's all going to be fantastic. So, yeah, thank you very much, Rob.
Yeah, Joe, I appreciate it. We're excited for you. I think you're in a great space, and growing to 20 people, the next milestone up to 50 to 100. It's all new challenges, new things, but keep the momentum going. Really excited to have you on the podcast. For those out there listening, how can they find you, Joe? What's the best way if they want to learn more about you, connect with you, learn about where you commit, shout out where they can find you. I'll make sure to drop it all in the show notes for them. But where can they get a hold of you at?
Yeah, the best way to search us is on LinkedIn. It's ecommit, ECOMMIT. And there's a load of information there. And our website, you can find us on Google very easily. So that's it.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to have those linked into the show notes, Joe. I appreciate you for taking the time, my friend. Really excited for future conversations with you and the team and some of the stuff that we get to do together. I'll be back in the Netherlands here most likely in a few months. So maybe maybe meet up in person for a drink, not just over virtually for a recording. So appreciate you, Joe. Thank you everyone out there listening. This has been another episode of Hospitable. As always, be a tier 1, like, rate, subscribe, review, do all the things to help us out. If you have topics or people that should be a guest of the show, or you yourself want to be a guest, let us know. All my information is the show notes as well. And until next episode, stay hospitable. Thank you.